Let's take a look at a simple technique for getting a two needle gauge. So suppose we have a central box and we want to look at the voltage of the two batteries. We want to do that and we want to construct essentially a two needle gauge. So let's start with a round needle gauge and create new. And let's see, the good scale for the batteries here might be, oh, I don't know. Let's do 12 volts, and let's play around a little bit with the scale till it looks about right. Okay, so there's a good scale. Let's see now, green to yellow to red. Yeah, sure, we could play around with those with the color spectrum and get the boundaries that are exactly right for our battery chemistry. But just we'll skip focusing on that for this purpose and just take a look at how to stack the gauges. So let's suppose that the label here is BAT1. Okay, and then what I'd like to do is add a second needle to this gauge. So let's start out by changing the font color to orange for BAT1. And let's go down and change the needle to orange as well. So we've now got orange for battery number 1, 0 to 12 volts. Okay. Now, if we want to stack a second gauge on top of this one, we start out by saying duplicate, and you'll see that right away nothing happens except that if I click finish here and finish here, you'll see I now have two identical gauges, one stacked on top of the other. Now, the way the Z ordering works in this website is the first thing that I put down, that BAT1 at the top of the list, is at the bottom of the stack, and then the second one, which we'll edit and we'll call BAT2, is at the top of the stack, and you can see that I'm only seeing the BAT2 gauge. So let's go down here and we'll change the color here to blue, and we'll change the color of the needle to blue. And then we can go down to where it says face visibility and scale visibility. So the face visibility is the black background, the dusty kind of black colored disc behind the gauge, plus the bezel that's around it. So we'll turn face visibility off, and we'll turn scale visibility, that's the rainbow colors, we'll turn that off. And then you'll see what we have is the labels are stacking on top of one another. So let's take our label position up, down, and we'll move that 2 label down a little bit. Then we go back up here to the value, and you can see that in fact we have now 2 needles, and of course we have to move our readout position for one of the gauges. So the BAT2, oh, that one's on the bottom. Okay, so we'll put BAT2 there, and then we'll slide up to the top, to the bottom gauge, excuse me. Top gauge, label position, readout position, there we go, up, down, and we'll move that. That's BAT1, move that on top. Okay, so you can see the value of 85. Now what the website is doing is it's guessing at the number of decimal points here based on the size of the number. Once this panel gets down to the transmitter will have access to the default number of decimal places for the sensor that you've assigned, because these will be 2 gauges on the transmitter, and so you'll have to set the input to each one of them separately, one of them to the first battery, one of them to the second battery. So this is a way of kind of keeping to our design paradigm of, one widget equals one telemetry variable, but combining them one on top of the other to give us something that gives the appearance of a 2 needle gauge. One other thing we can do if we want is some of these colors, like this blue for BAT2, don't look great against the dark background. So we have the ability, if we want to add a box behind it that can set it off a little bit. So if I go to the second one here and change it from transparent to white, you'll see that then BAT2 and BAT1, and maybe we want to just move one of them a little bit to separate those there. That looks a little bit better. We can then see that those colors stand out better. We can pick any color that we like for the the background. Sometimes I pick kind of a gray color rather than kind of the screaming white, but that's an artistic decision. That's up to you. And the last thing I wanted to mention is it generally is not a great idea to use different scales, the max and min scales, when you're stacking needles on a common gauge like this, because we're going to have to turn on the scale for the other battery to have two sets of numbers, and if the number of ticks don't match, then it's not going to look very good when the scales are stacked up. But let's suppose we go and we turn the scale visibility on, and then we can go up to the tick to number spacing here, and what we can do is we can move those numbers out a bit, and so we can create a second scale for BAT2, which is what we're working on now, shown in blue. And you see that the scale is on the outer side, just like the BAT2 is kind of in line with the outer side. And then if we wanted to go up here and change the maximum, suppose it had twice as many cells, we change it to 24. Now I picked something that's going to have a nice even multiple, the same number of major and minor ticks, and then I can create a second scale on the outside of the needle gauge like that. But generally, I would say that if you're going to use different scales and you want to put them on one gauge, I would tend to split the gauge down the middle and have the two gauges stacked so that there's an arc on the left and there's an arc on the right. And we'll do another video to show you how to do that.